We'll have a small discussion.
All right, so welcome everybody. We're here. Rick Goldstein and myself, Rabbi Yitzi. We're just having a little discussion on the Parsha, and you're invited to join us. So the name of the Parsha is Mishpatim. This is the Parsha of, it's literally Mishpatim means civil laws. That's literally the translation. The civil laws, and indeed this Parsha talks a lot about basic civilization laws like injuries, restitution of property, and so on. So the format, Rick will share, we'll ask a few questions. We've both been studying the Parsha, and now we'll talk about it. Okay.
All right. So the first thing that I kind of found interesting in the Parsha this week was the sort of the question of the mechanical attachment that we have to the law, right? It's sort of like the written pieces and how we mechanically attach ourselves to that law. But I think the more interesting part was sort of the spirituality or the emotional attachment. I think there were two pieces to how we were studying this. And as we get into the rules that we see that the Torah gives us, we can see they're very mechanical, things like not mixing milk and meat, about the bondswoman or the bondsmen and when to free them in terms of the Jubilee year and that kind of thing. But I'm more interested to understand sort of the spirituality of it, not the mechanics of it. I'd like to understand a little more about the phrase that is we will do and we will obey, or we will hear and we will hearken, that kind of thing. So I would like, can you espouse a little bit more on that particular concept in terms of the spirituality of the Torah portion?
That's a great. So we're skipping basically 3 volumes of Talmud. You should know, it's interesting. The laws of injuries is in the tractate of Talmud Bava Kama. And we learn, in the Rashi on the Parsha, he's quoting a lot from there, such as, so yeah, it is a lot of it's all mechanical, as we just call it, civil laws, right? That's very, it's, you got to do it. But at the end of the part, what you're referring to is at the end of the Parsha. It's interesting. Tomorrow's the 7th reading, the 7th Aliyah. It talks about some missed details of the giving of the Torah. Like we talked about it last week, the giving of the Torah, but it left out a couple of details and it puts it here, which is interesting because if usually you try to batch things together, right? Like batch it together, and the Torah typically does that. We'll talk about an event with all its details added in one space. Why did the Torah put the detail, which I'm going to just go into a little bit, which you're referring to, of Nasav and Ishma, in the end of this parsha? So if you go to page 475 in our Chumash, in the Kat Chumash, it says, having now finished the rational contractual side of the relationship between God and the people that was forged at Mount Sinai, where God gave the Torah, it backtracks some of the details of the more covenantal side of the relationship. So the Jews got to the Sinai desert before the mountain on the 1st of Sivan. They did a few things. Talks about day 1, the 2nd of Sivan, 3rd of Sivan. We missed out a detail that happened the 4th of Sivan that the Torah now says, that God said to Moshe that I'm going to give the Torah in a couple days, and you and Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, and the 70 elders, you will prostrate yourselves from afar. After that, Moshe alone approaches the rest, right? No one else will go with him. The others may not approach, nor the whole people. No one can go besides Moshe. And then it says in verse 3 on page 477, the first stage of establishing this covenant is the Jews' commitment. And thus on that day, Moshe came and told the people of God's words that, right, you're going to get the Torah from God directly, not through me for the commandments. God will tell you. So you have to basically raise yourself up to a level of prophecy, and therefore you have to fence off the mountain. You have to abstain from marital relations for those few days, 3 days till the giving of the Torah. And he reviewed all the laws, which were the 7 Noahide laws, and also the few commandments that were given till now, some details of Shabbat by the manna and other stuff. And the Jews respond, Nasa v'nishma. All the words God have spoken, we will do. Or Nasa, we will do. And it talks with some more details, but you're referring to that.
Yes.
So here's a very fascinating. So basically, the way it's structured, which is difficult to understand, is we talk about the Torah, 90% of it. Then we talk about the bulk of this week's Parsha, Mishpatim, which is rational laws. Mishpatim, the best way to say is rational laws. And then we have a couple details of some of the episode that happened by the giving the Torah, particularly where the Jew says, Naaseh, we will do. So one of the ways it's explained is, it's very interesting, is about the process of faith and logic and rationale. We know that a human being is finite and God is infinite. So the starting point has to be, there's something bigger, way bigger and infinite than me, which is faith. It's a form of faith. What happens after that? We have to take that faith, and that's indeed, by the way, what the Jews said. What was happened was they said, we will do this on faith. We won't make a contingent on understanding, right? Faith.
Right.
Then they get the Torah. They learn it. They really use their mind. They try to understand as much as the human being can understand, right? There's a lot of beautiful, rational things from this faith that benefit us in a very simple, plain way. But that's not the end. The Torah specifically says the part that they had the faith after we talk with the rationale, which implies that the process is you have faith. The starting point is faith, humility, which comes with that, then understanding, learning, understanding as much as you can, but then you come back to a higher faith. So the Torah had to end with faith again. This account, the detail, it skipped it, or it strategically placed the Jews' faith statement, Naaseh v'nishma, after they did a whole process of understanding as well. Because what happens is you start with faith, you then try to spend your life unpacking it and understanding it. But every time you understand something, you come to wow, there's so much more that I don't understand. It's a deeper faith. It's like, oh my gosh, this made so much sense. And there's so much more that I don't even understand. And I'm going to take it on faith and I'll try again. I'm going to tomorrow try again to learn more and end off with understanding, but yet even more faith. So if you had to break it down in Hebrew, it's Naaseh, we will do, faith. Nishma, we will learn, we will try to understand. But then Naaseh again, we will come to a greater faith afterwards.
So, it's interesting because we're talking about laws in here. In the law, there's always that element of ambiguity, which I think I see that sort of as the faith piece, which you just referred to, because that ambiguity is, you can infer things. Everybody can read the same line of Torah, and they can have 10 different feelings about what that one line means. And I think that's what you were trying to just dig at, was the fact that we're getting to look at things, and I see something, and then I can go deeper, or maybe not as deep as somebody else can go. And that's the spirituality for me, I guess, is the important part.
Indeed, like I said, this Parsha and the Mishpatim, the laws of injuries, the laws of if your bull hurts another person's bull, which is ideas of restitution of property. In today's, if your dog hurts somebody else's dog, like what, do you have responsibility? And there is the laws are spoken about. And many, many, many are very practical legal things. As I said, this is all discussed in the Talmud a lot. Like we're talking famous tractates of Talmud that really take these verses, and the rabbis debate. They have some starting point, but they debate it, and there are sometimes differing opinions. And that's part of the way Talmud is very interesting, because you get to see how, Moshe didn't just give verses and say, figure it out yourself, because that's a recipe for no consensus. So it says he gave the verses, and he wrote them into the scroll. He also gave a lot of oral commentary, but even of what certain things mean, and that was passed down. But even beyond that, he gave certain tools of, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it, exegesis or something, like of expounding. He gave certain 13 principles of expounding of the rabbis, how they know when they come to certain questions of practically how does this play out. They were able to do that. And even then there's differing opinions. And then there's a process of minority opinion, majority opinion, and ultimately the halacha following the majority. But you're right, there's a lot into it. And like I want to point out, there's many ideas. It's interesting. It says that when all these laws, and I said, this is in yeshiva, this tractate, Bava Kama, is studied a lot. Gemara is a lot of legal studying, right? It's not so, it's I wouldn't say it's not spiritual, because I think analyzing text is very spiritual, but it's not like, personal growth spirituality. It's very legal in that sense. It says when we pass away, right, we go to heaven, Gan Eden, and we study Torah there. We study with our souls. What are we studying? Like, do you have oxen? Do you have an ox in heaven? Like, do you have property in heaven? So it's interesting.
Do you wear the same clothes, the kittel that they bury you in? Is that what you wear for eternity, right?
What clothes? There's no physical stuff. It's what's clothes in heaven? What do you have there? There is a sense of soul's independent existence. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. So it has some continuing existence. But what's what is? So just an example of a law that we learn in I'll tell you a very legal law that's learned from this Parsha, and a spiritual way of what it teaches us spiritually, and that can apply. I think what they learn in heaven is the Kabbalistic, the deeper meaning, that's the spiritual, how this is a lot of metaphor for God. Not that this is not practical law as well, but Torah is so beautiful, it's so many layers, it's also spiritual metaphor. So it says like this: if you have an ox, back then it was very common to get ox. Your ox gores somebody. Gores another ox, and he kills it. So that ox, the first time offender ox, is called a tam. A tam means it's the owner's innocent, because he couldn't have known that this is a raging bull. It seemed like it was like just a nice, regular, domesticated ox, and then it went out of line. It gored, for the first time. The first two times, it's kind of the owner's tam. He's innocent in a way, because how could he have known? He still has to pay what we call half damages, because in spite of the fact that it was kind of, let's say, a freak accident, perhaps, his thing hurt somebody else's thing. The third time, this ox now becomes called a muad. The muad means it's a what do you call it? It's a like designated dangerous ox. And if it would hurt another ox the third time and on, now you have to pay full restitution for the damages, not half. What's an interesting law is, let's say I take this ox and I sell it. I sell my muad, my designated goring ox, and I sell it to somebody else. So it changes ownership. The law is that it resets the clock. It sort of resets. So this bull is now considered a tam. For this owner, it's not a goring, necessarily a designated gorer. It's more of you assume it's a regular ox now.
So that brings up an interest within the Parsha is also the idea of the city of refuge, the idea that if you commit a crime or a sin, okay, you're allowed to go to the city of refuge. So as I read about the ox and the reset, I was wondering, do you get a reset in the city of refuge, and at what point is the crime so heinous that there's not a reset, that there's actually some real punishment that takes place? I was a little troubled. I see all the earmarks of manslaughter and the idea of outright murder, and the whole story about you put the person who intentionally murdered somebody under the ladder, and the person who unintentionally did it comes down the ladder and kills the person. That
classic
whole
case of
there,
you fell on somebody and killed them by mistake.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I'm wondering how that whole thing works together in terms of what you just espoused about the ox. Do you get a reset?
So interesting. For an ox is different than a human being in the sense of the cities of refuge were only for human beings that killed by mistake. An ox, as I recall, if an ox hurts another ox, you don't kill the ox. You don't have to kill the ox. The ox is an ox. The owner now has to be careful with it, and maybe the Beis Din, the court might say, "Hey, you better watch, or we're going to take it. We'll seize it from you." But there's no city of refuge for an ox. Interestingly, if an ox kills a person, that ox is killed. That ox is killed. So we don't take chances any further.
But is it killed on the first time, or does it
the
also
first time?
the
first
one,
time.
2, 3?
If the ox kills a
time.
person right away, it's put to it's stoned, or that's what it says. Whatever. There's a certain process, and its meat is forbidden.
Right. Okay, so there are no resets for the are there resets for humans, or aren't there resets
for human beings? I think so. I mean, the human being with the city of refuge was the law. If someone kills someone on purpose, and there is witnesses, that person's a capital crime. If a person accidentally killed somebody, as we call it in Hebrew, b'shogeg, we look at it like, look, at one hand, how can you blame the guy? He didn't do it on purpose. There's a classic case of mistake. What are you going to do? He doesn't deserve a capital punishment for sure. At the same time, he has some guilt. He was careless, maybe. There's different types of mistakes, but at the end of the day, we also say he was an agent for death. And the real problem of why he is sent to the city of refuge, he has to live, it's partially an atonement. It's also because of worry of zealous kin of the deceased, of the victim, that might go after him. It's also like to protect him. So he has to, the inadvertent murderer has to go live in the city of refuge, both as an atonement and as a safety precaution. And he only does it till the high priest dies. That's considered like expiating his sin.
Interesting. Okay.
That's. Oh, but I wanted to finish off the idea with how do they learn in heaven this sort of legal detail, technical detail, that the designated ox that is considered a goring ox and it gets transferred, sold to somebody else, it's now sort of as a reset. It's considered not a designated killer. It's considered a regular ox as far as the owner being liable for the first 2 times damages. It's the idea of, in life, sometimes we have an ox. There's a big Hasidic metaphor. What's the animal soul, aka the evil inclination, aka the voice that makes you think more selfishly and self-preservation. It's called the animal soul.
It's the materialistic life that you pursue as opposed to the spiritual life.
The drive inside, right? The drive that makes you seek out self-preservation and material pleasure. That's called the animal soul. Sometimes our animal souls are more innocent, first, second time offenders. And sometimes they're designated, we know they're kind of like addicted or, very want to do certain selfish behavior. So that what we have an ox inside that could be a more innocent ox or a more repeat offender ox. So what's the solution? You have to transfer the ownership of the animal soul to another owner, to God. You say, my drive is not bad. If I make it only if I'm the master of it, it's all about feeding me, then it could be bad and obnoxious and selfish. But if I transfer the ownership, right? The legal laws, you transfer ownership to another owner, in this case, make my animal. So I'm going to use my talents, my drives, my passions, but for a higher purpose, it becomes a reset.
And that's what brings me full circle to our discussion from the beginning about spirituality, because I purposely see that the spirituality helps take that animal soul that we have and allows us to become that godlike soul that we always pursue.
Work in harmony, right? The animal
right,
soul.
They work in harmony.
We're a personnel. We're an animal soul and a godly soul. So the goal is not to pretend we can ever vanquish our animal soul. The goal is to use, and on the contrary, the animal soul has certain talents that the godly soul doesn't have: tenacity, passion, and so on. The goal is to just domesticate it. And that's an example of where the law actually has a spiritual parallel. So have a good Shabbos.
Thank you. You too, Rabbi. Have a very good Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom to everybody on the podcast. And thank you. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. It's a work in progress. Feedback is.
It is indeed. Thank you.
Bye-bye.